Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to this evening's webinar. It's from the Institute of Mechanical Engineers, and it's entitled Essentials for Early Year Graduates. During today's webinar, we'll be using the chat box, so it'd be really good if you could try to get that chat box up on the screen. We're off mute now, I think. So that chat box will be quite important. We're going to be using it to paste some links in there from Sandra as she goes through her talk. It would be wise if you open a Word document, if you want to copy and paste any of those links out of the chat box onto a fresh piece of paper effectively, and you'll be able to use these later on. It's quite often quite difficult to find the places where these links are. So as we go through, we'll put them onto the chat box and we'll get them. The chat box will also be used for any questions which you have for Sandra and Laura as we go through the evening. And if anyone would like a set of slides, we can let Sandra know and we will send you a copy of those through the ether. So on to today's speakers. We have Sandra Mulligan. She's based in Glasgow, and she guides engineers through the process of gaining professional registration with the IMechE. That includes encouraging students and apprentices to join the organisation, guiding it through the processes of gaining and approving accredited status of their training schemes, running industry contacts, networking events, training mentors, coaching applicants to achieve the Chartered, Incorporated, or Engineering Technician registration, and running CPD workshops. I do quite a lot of the workshops with Sandra. Laura is our second speaker today. She's a mechanical engineer working in the energy sector. She's worked for BP since 2014 within the production operations. She's passionate about the energy transition and is part of the Hydrogen Committee organising SPE Hydrogen Workshop. She's also got previous experience working as a manufacturing engineer at Rolls-Royce in a carbon sequestration startup. In her spare time, Laura is an active STEM ambassador, mentor, public speaker, and member of the IMechE Young Members Panel Committee. So I'll hand over to Sandra Mulligan for the start of the seminar.
Great, thank you very much, Steve. Steve is chair of the Aberdeen Area Committee, so we've just included the details of Aberdeen Area Committee in case you wish to connect after this evening's event. But obviously there are committees that are active throughout the UK and beyond, so you can connect with your local committee. That can be quite useful if you need a sponsor, for example, later in the process. I just wanted to draw your attention to our webinar hub this evening. I've noticed in doing events over the last couple of weeks that I've been mentioning the webinar hub, and often people have said to me, oh, webinar hubs, what's that? I didn't know about it. This is where we have included all the webinars we've been doing over the past couple of months and ones that we've planned over the future. So it can be very good as a useful source of information, both in terms of industry and special interest events, professional development events, and then my colleagues and I normally tend to spend our time out and about on industry visits and visits to academia. However, with the current pandemic, we've had to move all our events to doing them online. So on that part of the website, you'll see details of all the professional registration events that we've pulled together to help support applicants. So we do a combination of membership surgeries, which are one-to-one appointments, gaining professional registration workshops, upgrading to fellow, huge variety of different things. But details of all those webinars, and also if you want to book a one-to-one event, one-to-one consultation, you can do that through this page on the website. So just wanted to draw your attention to that because there's lots of good support available to all our members, and that's where you can access that information. So this evening is all about essentials for developing engineers. So during the course of the slides over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to cover a very brief summary of the journey to getting your professional registration, and then share with you the tools that are available to you as an IMechE member for recording your initial professional development. Initial professional development is, in very simple terms, building up evidence of competence so that you can gain professional registration. And when you gain professional registration, you then need to commit to doing CPD or continuous professional development. Often I get asked, what's the difference between IPD and CPD? Well, that's a very brief explanation of the difference. So your IPD is building up evidence of competence in order to gain professional registration. And really, your initial professional development starts when you start out on your career. So when you start doing that apprenticeship or undergraduate degree course, that's really when you're starting out on your journey towards becoming professionally registered. We'll also go over what we look for in quarterly reports. And then we're delighted to have Laura with us this evening. She will share her tips from her journey towards getting professional registration. And then at the end, we'll have questions from you. So if there's any questions that you'd like to put as we're going through the presentation this evening, if you post them in the chat box, and we'll be able to deal with them then. And if there's anything that doesn't come up, or if there's stuff that you think of after this evening, please don't hesitate to get in touch, because we're very much here to help you in the business development team. So the way I like to explain the journey to professional registration is in terms of 3 distinct steps. Now, I know some of you joining us this evening may already be a couple of years onto that journey, but I think it's always useful to recap so that you've got a good understanding, particularly for the benefit of those developing engineers who are perhaps starting out on their journey towards professional registration. So you start out initially with building up knowledge and understanding of engineering principles. And the easiest way to do that is by getting a formal academic qualification if you can. It's not a requirement, but it does show that you meet the requirements, academic requirements for the grade of registration that you wish to apply for. So the first step is you need to gain academic qualifications, and then you need to build up evidence of meeting the competence requirements. So typically, it will take you at least 4 years of relevant work experience in order to apply for CEng registration, and at least 3 years in order to apply for incorporated engineer status. And typically, if you've completed a modern apprenticeship in Scotland, you will meet both the academic and the competence requirements for registration. And then the third part of the process is the professional review. All applicants have to undergo a professional review because it's a peer review process. And that really is done on the basis of your application form. And if you're applying for CEng or IEng, you'll need to attend an interview. And as it happens, this event is one of a series of events, and the one we're doing next month is all about preparing for the professional review interview. If you're applying for MPDS registration, you won't need to undergo a professional review interview face-to-face. It will be done via your application form. So 3 steps: academic requirements, competence requirements, and demonstrating that you meet those competence requirements at the professional review interview. So the first step is to see if the qualifications you hold or will be graduating with meet the academic requirements for the grade of registration that you're applying for. So for chartered engineer status, the requirement is an accredited MEng degree or equivalent. So it could be that you do a BSc and an MSc, it could be that you do an MEng, it could be that you get a BEng and you decide then to do further learning to bridge the gap between your BEng and an MEng. And then you need to get at least 4 years of relevant work experience. Now, it's important to highlight that it's not automatic that once you've been working for 4 years, you'll meet the requirements, because it very much depends on you as an individual. So it depends on things like the opportunities that will be available to you, your work ethic, a whole variety of different things, but it can be done in 4 years. Some people it takes a little bit longer, other people can do it in slightly less time if they've got previous work experience. For incorporated engineer status, you will need to have an accredited BEng degree or equivalent and at least 3 years of relevant work experience. And for EngTech, typically an apprenticeship or modern apprenticeship will meet the requirements. Now, if you're a graduate and you've got at least 30 weeks of relevant work experience, or indeed if you're an undergraduate with at least 30 weeks of relevant work experience, you may wish to apply for EngTech registration. And that would mean then on your CV, you could show that you've got a degree, but you've also got work experience that's been assessed and verified by the institution. And given that it's a very competitive job market at the moment, that might be worth considering. Not for everybody, but it might be worth considering if you've already got relevant work experience. So if you're not sure about the status of your academic qualifications, you can use the qualifications checker on our website. That will generate an email to our colleagues in London, and they will be able to come back to you and say, yes, your degree is accredited or not, as the case may be. So the link to the qualifications checker is there, and Steve will be sharing it in the chat box as well. But that's the link to the quals checker. And before you use it, you'll need to get the following information to hand. So you'll need to tell us where you've studied, when you started, when you graduated, what you graduated with, and if it was full or part-time study. Now, if you've already used the qualifications checker, you do not need to use it again. But if you have not used it and you're not sure of the status of your degree, I would encourage you to do so, please. Now, if your degree is accredited, that's great. If it's not accredited, part of what IMechE does is we accredit university degree courses throughout the UK and beyond. And if a degree is not accredited by us or another engineering institution, we will need to ensure that your qualification is the equivalent of an accredited degree. So you may be asked to do an academic review, or if you haven't got a formal academic qualification, but you've got lots and lots of technical work experience, you may be invited to undergo a career learning assessment. And a career learning assessment is essentially where you're saying to us as an applicant, okay, IMechE, I don't have an accredited degree or I don't have the requirements for the grade of registration that I'm applying for, but I've got all of this technical work experience, and I believe I can show to you that through this experience, I have managed to gain the same academic knowledge and understanding as an applicant with an accredited degree. So first thing is, check out if the qualifications you hold meet the academic requirements for the grade of registration that you wish to apply for. Moving on then to step 2, which is all about your initial professional development, which is all about building up evidence of meeting the competence requirements. And as an IMechE member, there are a number of tools that are available to you as an associate member to record your initial professional development. So we thought it would be useful to explain what these tools are to you this evening. And these tools will be used to build up evidence of meeting the competence requirements. So you can see on the screen at the moment is a very brief definition of what we mean by competence and then how you can gain it. And really it's through your work experience in the workplace on a day-to-day basis. So it's the stuff you're doing on a day-to-day basis, the work you're doing alongside other qualified assessors or line managers, through the project activities or design reviews that they're taking part in, and perhaps through attending some training courses or going on secondments or visits to suppliers, a whole variety of different things. So you need to build up evidence of meeting the competence requirements in the work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis in the industry sector, or indeed if you're employed in academia as well. And there are 5 competence requirements, so you need to become familiar with those 5 competence requirements. So you can see on the screen at the moment is a summary of those 5 competence requirements. Competence A is all about knowledge and understanding of engineering principles. So how have you used the academic knowledge that you gained as part of your degree course and applied it in the sector in which you work? B is all about your ability to solve and analyze problems. C is all about your leadership skills. D is all about your communication and interpersonal skills. And E is all about the code of conduct. So there are 5 competence requirements which are laid out in a framework which is referred to as UK SPEC. And UK SPEC has been devised by the Engineering Council, and it applies across all of the engineering institutions, because in the UK we've got over 30 separate engineering institutions. So The Engineering Council has devised the framework, and then each institution takes that framework and applies it across their various industry sectors. So there's a summary of the IMechE interpretation of UK SPEC on our website, and it's broken down into the competence requirements for EngTech, for iEng, and for CEng. And as an applicant, you need to build up work experience where you address each of those 5 competence requirements, and keep a record of the work experience you've been gaining and how it maps against those competence requirements. The goal being to have enough experience to successfully apply for professional registration. So 5 competence requirements, and you need to build up evidence and record evidence of meeting those 5 competence requirements. Now, the tools that we have devised to allow you to record your initial professional development include the Developing Engineers Programme and the Monitored Professional Development Scheme and the Supported Registration Scheme. And I'll explain to you the various tools that we have within those portals in a moment. When you go on to Career Developer is the platform, and then there's different parts of the platform that you use depending on where you are in your development. So the CPD tools, the Continuous Professional Development tools, will be available to you after you've been awarded professional registration, because when you're awarded professional registration, you need to commit to CPD and to maintaining a record of your CPD. So again, we provide you with tools for recording your CPD. Now, it's not mandatory to use the IMechE tools to record your CPD, but they're just there for you to use as a member. So I'm going to talk you through very briefly the 3 programs that we have and how they may be relevant to you and your professional development over the years ahead. So the first tool that's available is the Developing Engineers Programme. And that's really available to any associate member, but you're more likely to use it if you're in an organisation where you don't have a mentor and you're not using MPDS or the Supported Registration Scheme. So it's a suite of tools that you can use, and it's very intuitive and user-friendly. And as you can see, I've just got a screen grab of the Developing Engineers Programme on the screen at the moment. So you can see it's divided into different sections that you can use for planning and recording your development. There's also professional registration guidance, etc. So it's divided up into distinct areas, and you can use these parts of the Developing Engineers Programme to record your development. So the bit that you're probably going to use the most will be your activity to log in terms of keeping a record of what you've been doing, because the top tip really is to get into the habit of every single week trying to write a sentence or 2 about what you've achieved in that particular week. That applies irrespective of whether you're using SRS, MPDS, or the Developing Engineers Programme. So Developing Engineers Programme is one of the tools that's available. If you're at an organisation that runs an accredited graduate development scheme, we refer to that as the Monitored Professional Development Scheme, or MPDS. Currently, there's about 300 companies in the UK running MPDS and about 5,000 developing engineers using MPDS to record their development. So very briefly, it's a quality assured route to gaining professional registration. And if you're lucky enough to join a company that has a MPDS in place, you'll be assigned a mentor, and you have regular meetings with your mentor for which you produce quarterly reports. And at those meetings, you discuss and review your progress with your mentor, and your mentor will review and sign off your quarterly reports. And then when you're ready, you need to complete an application form and attend your professional review interview. So again, it's just a different way of logging your work experience, but it's great to have the help and guidance and support of a mentor, because a mentor is normally an engineer who's professionally registered with IMechE or another engineering institution, and they're able to guide you and steer you through the pathway. Now, the other platform that's available is the Supported Registration Scheme. And that's really been developed because we had so many associate members getting in touch with us and saying, well, my company's not big enough to run a supported registration scheme, to run an MPDS scheme, an accredited scheme. However, I found a chartered engineer here on site who's willing to mentor me how can I record my development, and how can I access some of the tools that are available to people who are on MPDS. So the supported registration scheme is really available to developing engineers who've managed to find a mentor for themselves and who want to be able to record their professional development in a slightly more formal way than on the developing engineers program. So it's the same format, regular meetings with a mentor, quarterly reports, and building up and recording evidence so that you can apply for professional registration. So the next few slides I've put together really just explain to you what we look for. So some tips as to exactly what we look for in a quarterly report. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of text on the screen at the moment, but that's really just so that after you get a set of these slides, you'll be able to refer to them and they'll be useful for you to refer back to after this evening. So in the quarterly reports, we look for a maximum of about 500 words. Don't feel you need to use 500 words in every quarterly report. That's not a requirement. It's anywhere between 200 to 500 words. And really what we're looking for in your quarterly report is a synopsis of the key elements of what you've achieved and the contributions you've been making. Try and get into the habit of using good grammar and composition, and make sure you write out any jargon or acronyms that you use fully before you use the abbreviated version. That's really important, because bear in mind when you get to your professional review interview, the assessor who is assessing you may be from your industry sector, or they may be from a totally different industry sector. So you want to make your application easy for him or her to read and understand. Also useful to link the information in your report to UK SPEC. So the quarterly reports are really a way to identify your learning, think about how the evidence you're accruing maps against the competence requirements, because bear in mind there are 5 competence requirements. They're divided down into a number of sub-elements, and you want to make sure that when you're ready to apply for registration, you've addressed each of the 5 competence requirements. You wouldn't want to get into a situation that you had built up, for example, through being in a technical role, lots of evidence of meeting competence A and competence B, but doing very little for competence E, or vice versa. So when you write up your report, it's important to add in and identify what the work you've been doing and how the work you've been doing maps against the competence requirements. And that can be just as straightforward as adding in A2 or A1 at the end of a paragraph. And that just helps you in terms of building up good quality evidence and addressing each of the competence requirements. We also suggest that you use the evaluation section of the report to reflect on your successes and also your failures, because on this journey there'll be times when things go to plan, but equally there'll be lots of times when things don't go according to plan, but they can be very good learning opportunities for you. Use the evidence to illustrate your achievements. So the evidence that you include in your reports should be something that you've done as part of your normal role. So if, for example, you're on a company graduate scheme, and as part of that scheme you have to do company reports, don't feel that you need to do separate reports for MPDS. The report that you're doing can be just cut and paste into your MPDS report. We're not in the business of creating lots of additional work for you to do. Also encourage you to try and keep your evidence to maybe maximum of about 4 items of evidence per quarter. Bear in mind, if your mentor is perhaps mentoring 2 or 3 other graduates as well as you, that means that they could have a huge amount of evidence to try and review every quarter. So you can't tell us everything that you've done in a quarterly report. Just try and focus in on the highlights, really. And the kind of evidence that you may include in a quarterly report could be a presentation that you've given, it could be a report that you've written, it could be a feasibility study that you've contributed to, a meeting that you've attended with a customer or supplier, a design review that you've taken part in, or it could be learning outcomes from a seminar or course that you've attended. That is not a comprehensive list, it's just really to give you some ideas of some of the information that could count as evidence in a quarterly report. But ultimately, your quarterly reports, and most importantly, your application form, when the time comes to submit your application form, it's all about you. So it's all about what you have been doing. And that, I think, is one of the biggest challenges for engineers, is writing your application form in the first person, because it's all about you. It's all about what you've done and how you've developed and why you are competent. It's not about the team. It's not about the project or the product you've been working on. It's all about you. So tell us a narrative focusing in on what you've been doing, and a list of actions just won't demonstrate what you've been doing and why you're competent. So over the years, when you start out initially on MPDS or indeed in the supported registration scheme, the kind of language that you'll be using as a graduate engineer with perhaps very little work experience will be, I contributed to a review or I attended a review, whereas when it comes to applying for professional registration, that language will have changed from I contributed to or I was involved with to I managed or I led and I'm responsible for. That's the sort of language we would expect to see in an application. We'd also suggest that just to make life a bit easier for you, maybe just book a space or slot in your diary to get your quarterly report written up. Because if you do that, it's that little bit of space to give you time to collect your thoughts and get your report written up. But if you get into the habit of writing up a sentence or two every week without fail, you're never going to fall behind with your quarterly reports. So I'd say the biggest key to success is really to try and submit your reports on time. They're not long. We don't look for a long report, but if you fall behind, they can very quickly snowball. And then it can suddenly feel like it's very intimidating to try and get on top of them again. Also, please do bear in mind there is no such thing as a perfect report. It's really just about what you've been doing, what you've been achieving. So get into the habit of keeping good records and have regular review meetings with your mentor, because that shows that you're committed to your professional development and also that you're able to meet deadlines as well. And just to remind you that 2 quarterly reports lodged together is not monitored professional development, and the system, in fact, won't allow you to upload more than 2 reports at the same time. So just to be aware of that. Now, on our website, there's tons of information about the requirements for both CEng, IMechE, and EngTech. I've just taken a screen grab off the website just to show you where you need to go to. So this is one for CEng, and within there you will find guidance notes. You'll also find a sample completed application. So I'd really encourage you to go online and read through the sample application for EngTech, IMechE, and CEng if that's what you wish to apply for, because there's tons of useful stuff there. There's also very detailed guidance notes which go through the competence requirements in detail and also have the set of sample answers as well. So you can see there's just a block of text which is part of an answer to Competence A. It can be good to read through that just to give you a good indication of the writing style that we look for. So just to recap, make sure you keep a record of what you're doing. Think about how it maps against the competence requirements. If you've perhaps been working for a year or two and this is the first time you've heard about recording evidence, I'd suggest you try and get some time after this evening and do almost a brain dump of what you've achieved to date. And then, as I mentioned earlier, my colleagues and I regularly do workshops and run workshops which are free of charge for you to attend, where we can advise you on writing up your application and give you feedback on a draft application as well. So lots of help and guidance and support is available to you. Please don't be afraid to ask, because we're here to help you. And when you've got enough work experience to apply for professional registration, you will need to attend a professional review interview. And at that interview, you will be asked lots of questions based around the information you've included in your application form, and you'll be scored from a level 1 up to a level 4. Now, when you're on MPDS or SRS, your mentor will score you against the competence requirements. So if, for example, you get to the end of year 4 on MPDS and you're barely scraping level 2s, then I would suggest you're not ready to apply. Whereas if you're consistently being awarded 3s, then I would encourage you to apply. I would probably recommend that you're best of all to wait until you're consistently getting 3s across each of the 5 competence requirements before you apply for registration, so that you've enough of a margin of error to perhaps have a bad day and do a bad interview but still be successful. I would discourage you if you're just sort of barely scraping level 2s and the occasional 3. You're better off to wait until you're in a good, strong position to apply. So you'll be scored based on a level 1 to a level 4, and on the day of your professional review interview, both of the assessors will need to score you at 3 level 3s and 2 level 2s. But again, the scoring system is on the website, so worth having a look at when you get a chance. The other thing I just wanted to draw your attention to this evening is our industry competence profiles. They can also be good to have a look at because there are sample successful case history. So you can see on the screen at the moment is a screen grab from somebody who worked in manufacturing. And these are the scores that this applicant was awarded by the professional review panel that they attended. So that can be, again, good to read through because it will give you some ideas of perhaps stuff that you're already doing or work that you're already doing that you haven't mentioned in your application form. And finally, when you're ready to apply for IMechE or CMechE, you will need to attend a professional review interview. Now, in the past, the professional review interview setup looked like it is on the screen at the moment, where you had the interviews facilitator, the applicant, and the 2 professional review interviews assessor. These interviews are now being conducted via a 4-way Teams call. So it's a virtual interview now rather than a face-to-face interview. But just important to highlight that the success rate at interview is over 90%. So the vast majority of people who attend our professional review interviews are successful, and the interview lasts for about 45 minutes in total. So if you've heard that the IMechE interview goes on for at least 2.5 hours, I can assure you that that's absolutely not the case. It goes on for about 45 minutes to 50 minutes at the moment. And the success rate is very high because of all the help and guidance and support that's available to you as an applicant. So I hope that's been a useful overview for you. I mentioned earlier our next session is specifically on professional review interviews. That's going to take place next month, where we will have somebody who is a professional review interviews facilitator joining the session. So that should be useful. So I would now like to pass over to Laura, and Laura will share with us her experiences of recording her initial professional development. So thank you very much, Laura. Over to you now.
Thank you. That's super interesting. I'm sure you'll all agree. Hi there, I'm Laura. Let me just move the slide on. Okay, so we've had a bit of an introduction about me, but this is just an overview of my experience to date. So as you can see, I've done a very varied type of roles, but I've managed to use examples from each. So the first thing, I've actually used evidence from my internships and a startup company that I was involved with at university before even my graduate role. So I've had a graduate position at BP for only 4 years, and I've just recently applied for my CMechE status. So it just shows that you can, if you're quite dedicated and pretty organized with collecting evidence as you go, as Sandra's given you some tips about, that you can apply pretty quickly, even quite early on in your career. And that's what I wanted to do. But one of the ways that I got some of the other competencies that I wasn't getting in my role was I actually was quite active with the IMechE Young Members Panel. So I highly recommend, if you're not already involved with similar, either the IMechE or similar institutes or extracurricular activities, it's a really great way to build networking skills, event organization, perhaps controlling budgets, these type of things that you may not get the exposure to in your current role. So and also you make amazing friends, and they can give you tips about the interview and stuff, like very candid, off the record tips and tricks. The same thing goes for university students. If you're on the call, I actually joined the panel during my university years, and it even helped me get a job because the people that I met were young professionals, and they gave me great tips for how to apply to industry, interview tips, things like that. So that's just a little bit about my background. Yeah, and I just quickly mentioned my experience with the IMechE. So I joined as a student representative for, I think it was 4 years. I was a student rep on the panel. And then when I joined in the graduate scheme, I transitioned actually to the chair of the panel. We put on lots of great events. So you don't just have to be involved in the panel. You can also attend lots of the great events that we have. A lot of them right now will be very accessible to you from any location. So you don't even have to be in Aberdeen, for example, to attend some of our events. You can look at them online. And now I'm currently the energy representative. But that's just to show you some of the things you can get involved with that will help you on your application as well, because it counts as your continued professional development as well. So here's some of my tips. And I'm sure I went to events like this when I was at the start of my journey, and many people started off with, don't spend too long writing up your evidence and logs. You've already got your evidence, you can bullet point it. And I don't know if it's just because I'm a bit of a super nerd, but for every piece of evidence, I wrote a full-on report for each piece of evidence I uploaded, which was on top of the actual evidence itself, which was overkill. It really was. What I could have done and what I wish I'd done was maybe take a one-pager with some of maybe the pictures and things like that, and then a few bullet points, like a summary. But I went into a lot of depth. I think even once I submitted a 45-page report that describes my an investigation I was involved in. It's overkill. But do spend time, like Sandra said, every time you do a project. I actually use OneNote now. I don't know, or you can use a Word document or something like that. But every time you do a project, write the title even, a few bullet points, and then at the bottom, I always just put competence A, B, C, and then just a few words as to why it met that competence. And I did that throughout, and it helped me so much. I kid you not, racking your brains because I was offshore for a year, and I'm not gonna lie, my evidence tracking was fine. Like, I did save things into a folder that I called evidence file or logs for IMechE, but I didn't put the summary of each of the things that I did. I got a bit busy and a bit lazy. Okay, I'll be honest. I was probably a bit lazy. I should have done it on my time off, but I was too busy enjoying myself. So yeah, I fell behind a little bit when I worked offshore for a year, and I regret it, but I live and learn. But at least I had saved my evidence, so it was pretty quick to catch up. But it's very easy to fall behind. So, but just like I say, don't spend too long writing it. And the trouble was, I think since I started off with such, in my opinion, high quality reports, I thought I had to keep that up. So I thought it's going to look really sloppy going from really long reports to submitting something that's quite short. So just don't worry about that. I don't actually even think the interviewers look at your evidence, or maybe they do, but they might not look at the long reports anyway. You know, it's up to you to present your evidence. So that's the most important thing. That I started off with that. It's the most important thing that I'd recommend. Second point that I've already mentioned it, but utilize the IMechE network. Before I applied and submitted my application, I went to one of Sandra's workshops for, it was an applications workshop. It was the best thing that I've done. You had people, that are on the panel like Steve or similar, who could just say, right, change that bit. This is the way that we want to hear it. So that really helped, and it got me through it within a day. So I pretty much got the bones of my application in a day. And if I was doing it at home, it might have just dragged on and on. So it was really the best. And like I said, find your nearest panel. It's easier than ever now. Even if you don't have one close by, you can dial into the young members panels or similar now, so really recommend it. One of my other tips is to not only have a mentor, but be a mentor. So if you're doing the MPDS scheme, like I was lucky enough to do that, I got assigned an IMechE mentor. But even if you're not on one of those schemes, like Sandra said, you can find someone through the Institute who will be your mentor. And you just check in with them every so often, and you can go through the competencies and say, hey, the competencies are a really good tool for discussion points to check in on yourself and say, because you might be so focused on your job every day that you're working on technical things all the time. But then if you look at one of the other competencies, it might be, how you present or your communication skills, and you might be like, oh, I haven't actually done much of that this quarter. So how can I get more involved in that, or what could I do to improve myself in that area? So that's something that I really recommend. But also, we are in lucky positions to be aware of engineering for a start. There are so many students in schools and such like that have no idea about engineering, and that maybe don't have the opportunities that we have. So I really recommend to get involved as a STEM ambassador, or there's things like Career Ready, or there's all sorts of opportunities to mentor people. And even if it's not in a mechanical engineering sense, you could maybe mentor in other ways, but try and make it, if you can, try and make it a STEM mentoring relationship with younger students or even younger graduates. It also helps you appreciate it's actually quite a lot of effort that goes into it if you care about it, because you've got to do quite a bit of prep work. You've got to listen a lot. I find that sometimes I've reflected on my style throughout my mentoring relationships. I probably give too much advice rather than listening, because people can quite often come up with their own solutions to things. So I've improved, throughout that process. Okay, my last two tips that I'll give you, I've touched on this, but it's to use the UK SPEC competencies to gain new opportunities. So as you review your competencies on a regular basis, I suggest every few months, but personally I did it every month. Like Sandra mentioned, I put something in my calendar just to check in on myself. And sometimes you can actually use that to open up the conversation with your manager, or even find your own opportunities to go after something. So, for example, when I was reflecting on what I've done during my 4 years at BP, I realized I've not been in charge of any budgets. Okay, I've raised purchase order forms, I've compared quotes and things, but I've never had responsibility of a budget. So I went to my boss and said, look, I think this will help me in the future to become a better manager. And now I'm looking at how to improve our budget system across the North Sea. So you can really use the competency list to start those conversations. And finally, it's a really great way to celebrate. Every time I've submitted a quarterly report, or I've looked back at my evidence, I've been like, wow, I've actually done all that. So often on a daily basis, we get stuck in a rut. We're doing work, but do we ever take a step back and say, I've achieved a lot? And having that throughout, I think it's just a really nice and good thing. And then hopefully, with any luck, I'll get chartership soon. So that's really my tips. And then I've just included this as well. So through really using the process that the IMechE has offered, it's opened up insane opportunities. And I really don't think that I would have achieved these things. Like STEM ambassador, I was invited to become a keynote speaker offshore Europe. Like, would that have happened if I wasn't pushing myself to get better presentation skills? No, probably not. And I probably wouldn't have done all these extra things. So I definitely recommend to use it as a tool to really become the best that you can be. So yeah, that's just a few of my tips. But if anyone has any questions, you've got my name. It's Laura Steedman. You can add me on LinkedIn. You can obviously ask here, but I'm happy to chat to anyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. That was excellent. And thank you, Sandra. So we'll now go into the question session. Sandra joins us and gets her microphone on. Excellent. So the first question we've got is from Simon C. Is there any way for the IMechE to put people in contact with an engineer who could support them through the SPDS scheme? Sandra, I think that's one for you.
We did have an independent mentor scheme, but we found it was oversubscribed. So the best thing to do, I would suggest, is to get in touch with your local area committee, wherever that is. I'm not sure where you're based, but if you go onto the website and if you go to the Near You pages, you'll get details of all the local committees. So I would suggest that's a good starting point. You go along to one of those local events and just explain that you're looking for a mentor to mentor you. Often people don't realize that some of their colleagues can in fact be professionally registered, but they're just not using their post-nominals and their email signatures. So often just making it known in your own organization that you're looking for a mentor can get the word out, and you can be surprised who will suddenly step up. Or equally, you might find that some of the people you work with, say customers, suppliers, etc., or perhaps contacts at your old university. So there's lots of avenues I think you can explore in order to find a mentor. The other option is we ideally say that a mentor is somebody who's already professionally registered, but equally somebody who's not registered but has a good understanding of UK SPEC may be able to act as a mentor. But the committees are usually a good starting point, because often people who are active on the committees will be willing to act as a mentor, but if they're not, for whatever reason, they may often have friends or colleagues, or perhaps colleagues from their previous place of work if they're retired, or other retired contacts that they know that would be willing to act as a mentor. So lots of different avenues, I think, for you to explore. But do bear in mind it's not critical to have a mentor. It can be good to have one, but it's not essential. You can effectively be your own mentor. You can really, take ownership of your career, use the tools that are available, use the resources that are available, and allow that to help you gain your professional registration.
Okay, thanks, Sandra. That's good. So we have another question here from Mustafa. Is there a quarterly report template which people can follow?
No, there isn't. There isn't a specific template. We just say that we look for anywhere between 200 to 500 words. And the main thing is that it's a summary of your achievements. We're not looking for a big long list of absolutely everything you've done during the quarter. It's really your main achievements, and that you've thought about how those achievements map against the competence requirements. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Laura.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it as well, Sandra, but it's especially important, after you've used the words from the UK SPEC to make it very clear, a clear link. Yeah. So when you raise an example, you can't just say the example. You say, this example demonstrates my knowledge and application or whatever. Yeah. So you make it clear. And then you could even put in brackets competence A. A1 or P2 or whatever. I think that's really important to do. So really important to become familiar with the competence requirements so that you're aware of those requirements and you know how what you've been doing to date maps against those requirements. It also means as well, though, that at your annual appraisal, for example, if you see that there's a shortfall or a shortfall is potentially going to develop, that's when you can speak to your line manager and say, look, I'm a little bit weak in this area. How can you help me get work experience in this particular area as well? So by taking ownership and being aware of how you're progressing, it means that you can make sure you get to achieve your goal sooner rather than later in your career, and all the rewards that brings to you. I always have the competencies printed out beside me when I'm writing it. Good. Also, good.
Very good. We've got a third question here from Owen. A quick question about Q&A about chartership evidence. Do you have any advice on how to provide evidence for work that's in a classified or sensitive industry, e.g. defence? We get this question a lot, Sandra.
Yes, we do indeed. You want to answer that one, Steve?
Well, the answer generally is that anyone who's going to read these documents have to abide by the IMechE Code of Conduct. So you have a certain amount of security there. However, you can talk in generalizations. You don't need to talk about specific items. You can talk in generalizations and work your way around it in that way. If it is specifically sensitive, you should let us know at the interview, and we can make sure that is covered. But anything else to add from that, Sandra?
No, I would say people who work in industry where, outside of defence, where there are similar issues relation to competitive details, for example, or confidential pricing information, they're bound by similar restrictions. So you can say, for example, well, I'm competent, but I can't tell you why I'm competent. You can just talk about it in more general terms. So rather than saying you were able to reduce costs by, for example, £100,000, you can say you reduce costs by 10% or whatever, as the case may be. We don't match up interviewers with interviewees. So while you work in defence, you may find that on the day your assessors also work in defence, or you might find they work in a totally different industry sector. We had a case in Glasgow a couple of years ago where somebody worked in nuclear defence, and on the day of his interview, by pure coincidence, both of the assessors happened to work in nuclear defence. So he got in touch after the interview to say, fantastic, thank you so much for arranging that for me. And I immediately had to say, no, can't take any credit for that whatsoever. It was pure coincidence. So.
Okay, excellent question there and answer. Okay, so this is one that we get quite a lot of. What if my B-Eng is not accredited by the IMechE, however my MSc is? What does this mean when I want to apply for C-Eng in the future?
Okay, that means a couple of things. Firstly, if your B-Eng is not accredited by IMechE, but it's accredited by another engineering institution. So if, for example, your B-Eng is in chemical engineering or civil engineering, for example, and it's accredited by IChemE or ICE, then IMechE will accept it as meeting our academic requirements. If, however, it's not accredited by any engineering institution in the UK, then you would need to undergo an academic review, because it's your primary degree that we tend to be concerned about, in particular with accreditation. So even though your MSc is accredited, we would need to, you would need to undergo academic review to ensure that your B-Eng meets the requirements as well. It's not a particularly onerous process. It just means that you need to get a copy of your transcript for your degree. And if it's not in English, you would need to get it translated as well. And that would need to get sent in to our colleagues in London with a copy of your CV. It will go in front of a panel of academic experts. They would review it and come back and say, yes, it's the equivalent of an accredited degree, or not, as the case may be. So academic review would be the pathway there.
Okay, so we've got quite a lot of questions coming in now, so this is good. The one question here we've got is there a variation between being chartered by the Institute of Engineering and Technology and the Institute of Mechanical Engineers? That's quite an interesting question.
Oh, gosh. That's kind of the million-dollar question, really, isn't it? I would say that there are lots of engineering institutions in the UK. It's one of the challenges that I think engineers in the UK face, but we're not going to go into that debate just now this evening. But I think you're probably best to join the engineering institution that's most relevant to you. But the engineering institutions are all licensed by the Engineering Council to award registration. So we all have to have our processes in place where candidates are assessed and assessed fairly, and obviously we have to verify how everybody is assessed, etc. as well. So the processes that the institutions have in place vary slightly, in that with some institutions, for example, there's a written exam as part of applying for C-Eng. With other institutions, you ask to do a brief presentation, etc. So obviously, I work with IMechE, and Steve and Laura are both members of IMechE, so we're most au fait with the IMechE requirements that are in place. So I think it really depends on you, what your career goals are, but you tend to find that the processes are pretty similar, but the institutions do business in a slightly different way. I know certainly that IET has decoupled registration from membership. So with IET in particular, you can be an MIET but not be professionally registered, unlike IMechE, where being a full member means that you're either chartered or incorporated or an engineering technician in terms of registration. So that's a bit of a long-winded answer to a short question, but I hope that covers what the main points.
Yeah, you need to just be careful that when you think you're getting membership, you're maybe not getting chartership in some of those other institutions. Okay, so we've got one here from a third-year mechanical engineering student in the University of LA, and he's asking if there's anything can be done in the last 2 years of his degree which will help with the registration process. I'm trying to think of any specific things that can be done in the last 2 years other than getting very good results in your exams, actually.
Perhaps taking part in some of the competitions that we organise, because we organise a huge variety of different competitions for students. That can be really good to add skills to your CV. So that could be, for example, Formula Student, the Unmanned Aircraft Challenge, the Railway Challenge, but also there are competitions for speaking, like Speak Out for Engineering. I don't know, Laura, if you want to add to that?
Well, I think that's a really good idea. Engineering societies, I don't know if where you are, if there is a young members panel. If there is, you could get involved. If not, you could why not set one up? You could show leadership and take all the IMechE resources and actually you yourself promote them. That would not only show that you're doing things, but you're also taking leadership. So I definitely recommend to get involved in these type of initiatives. And again, the STEM ambassador type work as well is really good. Yeah. If you can't get, also, of course, you can try and apply for work experience and things. I actually started off in a drawing office unpaid for one week in the summer. I just sort of, I know it's really hard to do right now, but there's all sorts of things that you can get involved with if you just put your feelers out, and it's exhausting. So you do have to speak to a lot of people to try and get those opportunities, and just go to these events. You can sometimes attend events and you might get a contact and you can reach out to them.
I think as well at the moment there's great opportunities to do stuff online. You don't actually have to go along physically to an event. You can do stuff online. And also lots of companies now seem to be offering virtual internships, etc. as well. So there's new opportunities, I think, evolving and being developed all the time. So just use all the opportunities, and if there are opportunities, take advantage of them. If there aren't, try and create some yourself.
Good luck.
Okay,
even the fact you're here is a good thing. You're already taking initiative, so.
Yeah, that's a start, isn't it? Okay, so we've got time for one last question. It's quite a good one. It's on the engineering tech. I'm a final year undergraduate who's worked in industry for a gap year. He's documented that work a wee bit. How simple is the process to apply for engineering tech now? And would I be able to do this independently, or do I need to have a contract from my gap year employer?
Okay, that's a really good question. Thank you very much for that one. It is a pretty straightforward process. If you go onto the EngTech pages of our website, you will see the EngTech application form. So it's the EngTech standard route application form that you need to look out for. So that's on the website along with guidance notes and an exemplar. So I'd suggest as a starting point you have a good read through that and then have a go at writing up your own application. When you've got that written up, if you email that over to me, I can give you feedback on it before it's submitted. And with that application, as I mentioned earlier, you don't need to attend an interview, and the 5 UK SPEC competence requirements for EngTech are summarised down into 3 questions on the EngTech application form. So it will be very much talking about the work that you've been doing, but you would need to get a sponsor to sponsor your application. So somebody who is already professionally registered would need to sponsor your application. So again, you might find that one of your lecturers would be able to do that for you, or if not, get in touch with your local committee. But if you just go to the homepage of the website and just put EngTech into the search box, that will take you straight to the EngTech pages and the application form. Any queries or questions after you've had a look through that, just drop me an email and I'll be able to help you.
Okay, I think we've got come to the end of the time slot. So thank you very much for everyone for attending. That's been really good. I think we've covered a lot. I'd like to just remind you of the next event on Wednesday, the 4th of November, 6:30 again, and it's preparing for the interview. We're going to provide some tips on what to expect at your professional review interview for CEng or IMechE and how to prepare for it. And also understand living with the COVID interview arrangements. Obviously, we have to do things slightly different. For that event, we'll be joined by Stuart Akerhead. He's a fellow of the Institute and he's an experienced PRI facilitator. So I'd like to thank Sandra and Laura for helping us out today. That's been really good. And we'll close the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much as well, Steve, for hosting.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Thank you.
Cheers.